This tutorial is going to go over the second half of lesson 27, and we're going to discuss viewports, as well as the drawing scale factor again, and how dimensioning works in model space as well as in paper space. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and transfer this house over to paper space. So currently it's drawn in model space, and I'm going to go ahead and leave my dimensions set right there. Also remember, in the last tutorial I showed you, as far as dimension styles go, the only change that I made to my dimension styles for arc style was under the fit tab and under dimension scale, and I changed that to 48. And that's going to come into play in just a few minutes, and I'll show you how. So remember that. Okay? So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and go to paper space, and you should have your 11 by 17 1-to-1 scale tab down here that we used in lesson 26E. And you'll remember that this green rectangle right here, that is currently our viewport. So if I double click inside of there, it gets a little bit thicker, and you can see the X and the Y, but you cannot see the house. And that's because currently the house is much bigger than the viewport. But if I double click the wheel on my mouse, there's my house right there. And so now I've just zoom extents on the house, and it's just fitting in there. It's not to any specific scale or anything like that. So if you were trying to print it out in a specific scale, which is very common in the industry, you need to bring out the properties button, here's the button right here, or I believe it's under tools, and properties is right there. And once you do that, here's the scale. Currently it's on custom scale, and I can zoom in and zoom out, and it's going to stay on custom scale. If I do 1-to-1, you're going to notice that you cannot see it at all, because remember, this house is 30 feet wide by at least 20-something feet tall. Or just the walls is 20 feet tall, and then the roof is even taller than that. So of course it's not going to fit. So we're going to want to use a 1/4 inch equals a foot. So I go ahead and scroll down. Here's a 1/4 inch equals a foot. And I'm going to go ahead and double click the wheel so it centers it in the middle. You'll notice it went back to custom scale. So I go over here now and I do 1/4 inch equals a foot, and it stays centered when I do it that way. So I'm going to go ahead and double click my paper space, because that is set exactly how I want it to be. It is scaled 1/4 inch equals a foot. And I'm going to show you something that's kind of interesting now, now that we have it set to the proper scale. Keep in mind, model space is no longer active. If model space was active, I'd have to double click in here, and you see your X and Y axis. When I double click out here and this viewport gets thin, now I'm in paper space, no longer in model space. So I'm going to go ahead and do a dimension in paper space. I'm going to go ahead and click linear dimension, and I'm going to do the same dimension right here. And what you see is that dimension is giant. And the reason why that dimension is giant is because when we went into our dimension styles and we went to the fit tab, the drawing scale factor, or the dimension scale, is currently at 48. Okay? So basically what it comes down to, and the book explains this really well on page 27-9 and 27-10, is that you either need to decide whether you're going to dimension stuff in model space or in paper space. And there are advantages and disadvantages to both of those things. It goes over those in 27-10. If it were up to me, I would dimension everything in paper space. And the main reason why is, you'll remember in the last tutorial, I made you come into the dimension style, and I made you come into the fit tab and go to the dimension scale, and you have to figure out what the drawing scale factor is mathematically. Well, if you don't know how to do that, or if you haven't done this for a while, this can be a little bit challenging. So, trying to figure that out, you may have to look that up in a book or something like that. It can be a little bit more challenging if you have to figure out what the drawing scale factor is. Okay, so bottom line is, you need to choose whether you're going to dimension in paper space or in model space. And remember, probably the biggest thing to consider is, if you're going to dimension in model space, you need to be able to figure out your scale factor. If you're going to dimension in paper space, you don't have to worry about that, because it will stay the same. So I'm going to go ahead and change this back to 1, and click apply, and click OK. And you're going to notice that now on this dimension down here, you can no longer see the dimension. It's really, really small, because it doesn't take into account the drawing scale factor. But that's okay, because I've decided that I'm going to go ahead and dimension my stuff in paper space and not in model space. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to paper space here. And now you can see that now that I put the drawing scale factor back, this dimension actually works out perfectly. So I'm going to go ahead and delete it. And again, I am currently in paperspace because you don't see your XY axis here. You see this triangle down here. That shows me paperspace. So if I go here, I'm in model space. If I come here, I'm in paperspace. And I know I keep saying that over and over again, but for something that's fairly new, it does take a little bit of getting used to. Also, you do want to make sure that you're still on 1/4 inch equals a foot, and I haven't changed anything, so mine still is good to go. And now that I'm in paperspace, I could go ahead and dimension this, and everything should look the way that I want it to look. So there's 30 feet. You notice that my tick marks and my text is all proper size. If I needed to, let's zoom in on this and make sure we get the corner here. And this should be 20 feet. That's 20 feet right there. We could go ahead and dimension other things if we wanted to, but it's not really necessary. We could do a line, and we could go from here, and we can go all the way to the end and doing a line dimension like that. The only issue I have with that is that's sticking a bit beyond the viewport, so we probably want to move that down a little bit just to make sure it stays within the viewport. So you can do all sorts of different dimensions, and remember these dimensions right here are on paperspace. If I go back to model space over here, you'll notice that none of those dimensions are showing up because we dimensioned it in paperspace. But when I go to paperspace, there they are. And of course, once we are done setting this up, we fill out our title block properly, and we could go ahead and print this out. So that's kind of using a combination of both model space to draw it, and then paperspace to set up the dimension or any text or any notes or things like that. And that's what I do normally. Is I'll draw my drawing here in model space, and once I have the drawing done, I'll generally come to paperspace, set it up in the proper scale, and then I'll put in any notes or any dimensions that I need to do in paperspace, and that way it works out well. Also on page 27-10, it does go over some of the pros and the cons of paperspace versus model space. You may want to read those. It says sometimes the dimensions float away in paperspace and you have to regenerate the dimensions, and it gives you the command of dim regen to regenerate those. So if you ever run into that, I don't run into that too much, but the book does address that, so that is something interesting to be aware of as well. So you may need to watch this tutorial a couple times. Try it out. Make sure you understand the difference between paperspace and model space. If you don't, make sure to ask me, and I will come over and show you as best I can. Okay? We'll see you in the next tutorial.